special welcome to our dignitaries and diplomats here tonight. Welcome to our candidates, Brooke Van Velden, the Honourable Grant Robertson, the Honourable James Shaw, to be here soon, and Nicola Willis and the Honourable Tracy Martin. It's great and appropriate that Wellington should have such a good lineup. Also, I'd like to acknowledge our event partners, Jackson Stone, sitting almost in the front row. We appreciate your support. Also like to mention our venue partners, Victoria University, if you didn't know where you were, and our media partners at the Dom Post. So really good. So we'll get some good coverage tomorrow. Fingers crossed. I know we will on stuff, but let's fingers crossed for the Dom. It falls on me to do the exciting housekeeping. Let's start with emergency procedures. In the unlikely event of an emergency, we want to make sure you know what to do. Take a moment now to look around you at where the nearest exits are. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we should all get out. If the fire alarm sounds continuously, evacuate the building using the nearest exit. During an earthquake, act quickly. If you are able, drop to the ground, get under cover and hold until the shaking stops. Hold, I'm not sure what you hold, but until the shaking stops. If there's no cover, put your arms over your head and neck and to protect them. After an earthquake, stay inside and gather in one place until it's safe to exit. If the building is unsafe, evacuate, take your belongings. If the building is unsafe, evacuate, take your belongings, be aware of falling debris and make your way to the large open space following the guidance of your host. Interesting instructions. It means we've got to think about it. Indeed. If you feel a strong earthquake that makes it hard to stand up, or weak rolling earthquake that lasts a minute or more, it could be a tsunami risk, move immediately to the nearest high ground. So up by Parliament or keep running. Keep moving. And of course, please ensure all cell phones are on silent. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our MC for tonight, a fellow Wairapian, so she's got to be good. Tracy Watkins is the Stuff Sunday editor, including editor of Sunday Star Times, Sunday News. Previously, she was political editor and bureau chief for Stuff. Chief sounds better. New Zealand leading multi-platform media company. Tracy is also based in the Wairarapa. Yep, we've already said that. At the forefront of media change as a former political editor, head of Stuff Political Bureau, including pioneering and overseeing the transformation from print focus to digital first multi-platform policies bureau. I said it that time. She's an award-winning columnist and journalist, including Political Columnist of the Year, Political Feature Writer of the Year, and Investigating News Reporter. We're lucky to have her here tonight, and I'm really looking forward to how well she MCs these illustrious group here. So, Tracy, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm actually here standing in for the new Dominion Post editor, Anna Fifield, who is still in quarantine, on her way here, and I think pretty excited about it. She's come from the US in Beijing, so a pretty experienced reporter. And unfortunately for you, you don't get to meet her tonight, but you will, I'm sure, being Wellington business people. Thank you for joining us for this special debate. As John said, I'm the editor of the Sunday Star Times, former political editor. I'd like to start by thanking our partners. First of all, Jackson Stone and Partners. They're our event partner for tonight's debate. Thank you as well to the team at Victoria University of Wellington for their support as our venue partner. And also the Dominion Post, as mentioned by John, the media partner. And before we get started, it'd be great if we can just hear a word from each of our partners. I'm going to ask David Hollander, he is the Chief Executive of Jackson Stone and Partners, to come up here and talk to us about his involvement.
Who don't know me, I'm David Hollander, the Chief Executive of Jackson Stone and Partners. Jackson Stone and Partners, we're a Wellington-based and New Zealand-owned executive recruitment and search business. We operate across government, the private sector, local government, NGOs, and almost everywhere else that requires our services. We have a very strong commitment to Wellington. We employ directly 31 staff, all who either live in Wellington or in the Wellington region. We believe what's good for Wellington is good for the region, and when speaking about central government and our members of parliament, what is good for Wellington is good for the entire country. Firstly, I'd like to thank John Milford and his team at the Wellington Chamber of Commerce for all the work that you have done and advocacy that you've provided on behalf of the business community over the years, and also during this really important time of COVID-19. As we all know, it hasn't been an easy time for anybody. I'd also like to thank the Chamber for giving Jackson Stone and Partners the opportunity to sponsor this event. And on behalf of us all here this evening, I'd like to welcome our local candidates and members of Parliament, Grant, Tracy, Nicola, James and Brooke. As committed Wellingtonians, we're all very interested in what you have to say and your party's views for the Wellington electorate. So good luck to you all for the coming elections, and thanks for coming tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We'd also like to hear from Jane Bryson, as John mentioned, she's the Deputy Dean of the Wellington School of Business and Government at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening. It's a great pleasure to welcome you tonight and for the University to be co-hosting or venue hosting this Wellington Election Debate 2020 in association with the Wellington Chamber of Commerce, Jackson Stone and Partners and the Dominion Post. Welcome to our hard-working politicians. I look forward to what you have to say. I, like the rest of the audience, I look forward to your perspectives on the issues that matter to Wellingtonians. Be it the economic and other impacts of COVID-19 and your party's policies responding to them, or more regional questions around infrastructure, water, transport, sustainability and insurance. I know the university's students will be particularly keen to hear what you have to say about the city's ongoing low-cost rental house shortage. And our staff will be interested in your plans to support the tertiary education sector, which has been hit so heavily by international travel restrictions. Wellington's a fundamental part of the Te Ranga Waiwai that defines Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, which is why we're so proud to carry Wellington's name and to be an enthusiastic partner to the city. COVID-19 has interrupted us as an organisation. Dare I say, at times it has discombobulated us, but we are committed to continuing to attract many thousands of students to study in the city each year, which supports Wellington's businesses from throughout New Zealand and around the world. We're one of the two largest employers in the city with more than 3,000 staff. And I would like to take this opportunity to publicly acknowledge and thank our academic staff and the professional staff supporting them for the extraordinary effort they have made this year to pivot our educational delivery between freedom, lockdown and different alert levels. They've been completely amazing, as has the Students' Association and the student body. As a global civic university in the heart of New Zealand's capital, we pride ourselves on the relationships we have with government, business, the public service and diplomatic community, NGOs and the wider community. And the university's level of civil engagement is no more evident than here in the Wellington School of Business and Government, which in its very name signals the tightly bound nature of these two communities and our commitment to working with both and, where necessary, to hold both to account. We relish the opportunity to share our knowledge and research findings where they're needed, while also fulfilling our academic role as critic and conscience of society. And we hope in that way to contribute to the improvement of societal, environmental, economic and cultural well-being. Election-wise, we're about to launch a study of politicians' social media in the campaign, with the results and accompanying analysis freely available under Creative Commons. Our Institute for Governance and Policy Studies has been running free public seminars featuring leading politicians. The next on economic issues is on 7th of October. We have a spotlight lecture series of free election and referendum-related webinars, with the next on 29 September, looking at the end-of-life choice referendum. And we are top and tailing the election with free public panel discussions featuring some of the university's leading political scientists, one on 2nd of October and the other in early November. So check out the university website if you're interested in any of that material. Tonight's debate, therefore, is very much a piece of Te Herenga Waka Victoria University of Wellington's other activities. And I don't know about you, but as a Wellington Central voter, I can't wait to hear what everyone has to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you all for your support for tonight's event. We'll get into the debate. First of all, I would just like to point out the debate is being live streamed on Stuff, and there's a live blog running as well. The audience is welcome to show your enthusiasm with applause, but interjections and jeering isn't respectful, and candidates, I'll remind you of that too. If we're unhappy with any audience behaviour, I won't be backwards in telling you. Let's be respectful of our candidates. Tonight we have ACT's Deputy Leader Brooke Van Velden, the Green Party's co-leader James Shaw. Welcome, James. I gather you got stuck in traffic. Nicola Willis from the National Party, New Zealand First, Tracy Martin, and of course the Labour candidate Grant Robertson, who's also the incumbent MP for Wellington Central. It's important to note that Brooke, James, Nicola and Grant are running as Wellington Central candidates while Tracy is campaigning in Oharu. And I will also point out that Tracy has to leave at 7 p.m. She has another engagement. She won't, it's not because she's storming out in a harp or anything. She's planned it in advance. So let's start, first of all, by giving our candidates a round of applause. Thank you for coming. To start, we're giving each candidate 2 minutes to introduce themselves. It's a free-for-all. Always do that under advisement with MPs. But whatever they want to pitch to you, they can. After the candidate speeches, I have a series of questions to ask, and I will moderate the debate as needed. When it comes to the Q&A section of our debate, we're not going to time each candidate's response, which I have pointed out to the Chamber is actually quite dangerous after 20 years in Parliament. But we do want to have a real and robust conversation tonight on what candidates will do. We will see how we get on. So we drew numbers prior to the event, and the order for the introductory speeches are as follows. James, are you okay to start, having got delayed a bit? Okay. So we go with the order of the draw. James Shaw, then Brooke, Grant, Nicola, and then Tracy. Right. So, James, take it away.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Good evening Wellington. It is something of a truism to say that we live in unprecedented times right now. That's kind of obvious, but what is less obvious is what happens next and where we go from here. Now, whilst we're navigating through the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, there are actually 3 other crises that the country has been facing, which haven't gone away just because we are in the middle of a pandemic crisis. These are the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the crisis of deepening poverty in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and all of those present here in Wellington. Now, we can solve all of these problems at once. Over the course of the last 40 years, we have chronically underinvested in our built environment, right around the country and here in Wellington. So it is obvious to anybody that chief amongst that is our lack of housing. but also the one which is presenting a great deal right now in Wellington, which is the Three Waters infrastructure in terms of the pipes under our feet. That started to become obvious after the Havelock North poisoning just prior to the 2017 election campaign. In our schools and our hospitals and in our transport infrastructure, in virtually every category except for 7 urban motorways under the Roads of National Significance program, we had chronic underinvestment in all of those categories. And at the moment, of course, we are injecting an enormous amount of capital into the economy in an attempt to get ourselves through the pandemic crisis. So we have an opportunity and a responsibility to put every dollar of that pandemic stimulus to work, resolving the long-term challenges facing our city and our country. And I would argue at this election that I know that we like to say that at every election that this election is critical, but this one really is, and this time I mean it, because the set of decisions that the next Parliament and the next government will make are of an order of magnitude more significant than the ones of any regular order of business.
Thank you, James. 2 minutes. That was 2 minutes. Yeah, it goes fast. Brooke.
Good evening. Thank you, Tracy. And thank you all for coming out tonight and braving the wet weather. And also thank you to the people who are probably a bit smarter and a bit drier who have been watching this at home. So firstly, this election is just about 2 things. It's about having a real roadmap to recovery from COVID-19 and a health response, but also about rebuilding the economy and having a plan to get people's lives back on track. I think only ACT has a plan for both of these things. We deserve, as New Zealanders, to have a coordinated response to COVID-19. And to be honest, I don't think that this government has given us a coordinated response. It kind of feels like they're just making it up as they go along. And to have a coordinated response, we need to be making sure that we're not just borrowing and spending, because we're borrowing $140 billion, but we need to be making sure that there is a good way of being able to pay that back and making sure that we're not foregoing health and education spending that will happen in the future, because at our current rate, we'll be paying more on the interest of COVID-19's debt than we will on the entire education budget, and I think that's wrong. Secondly, if we want to enhance our well-being, we have to look at countries like Taiwan and stop looking at ourselves in relation to the countries that are getting it wrong and places like Victoria, but actually looking at countries that are getting their response right, like Taiwan. And we need to set up a specialised epidemic response unit like they have in Taiwan, so that we don't have to keep going through rolling lockdowns, but we can actually get our economy back on track. But finally, ACT as a party of small business. We have 7 small business owners in our top 10, and I think having those people representing us in Parliament will do a huge service to the business leaders in our community, because we're the party that believes in lower taxes, less debt, and a growth-led recovery. Thank you.
Thank you. Grant.
Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Greetings everybody. Thank you very much to the Chamber and to Jackson Stone for having us here tonight. I'm standing up mostly because I wasn't sure about either my stability or the stability of that chair there. Look, for me, I actually agree on one thing with Brooke. Only one thing from what she's just said, and that is that there are 2 elements to what we've got to get right at this election. The first of those is that we need to continue to manage and deal with COVID successfully. My view is New Zealand has done that. Not just the government, but New Zealand has done that. And we can look to other countries who've done well, and we constantly do. And other countries look to us because we have managed this well by believing and continuing to believe that the best economic response is a strong public health response. We are back in level 1. We are able to operate our economy in a way that many other countries around the world cannot do. So we must keep investing in that. That does mean investing in our health system. It does mean investing in our border. It does mean making sure we have gold standard in all the ways that we will manage COVID-19, because it is not going away. It is resurging in Europe, and we have to be ready and wary about that, but also prepared to be able to start bringing more people in across our borders safely as we can. The second thing we do need is that balanced plan, and we've got it. It is about looking to the future of our economy and being truly sustainable. It is about addressing those long-term infrastructure deficits that New Zealand has been bedevilled with for a long time. And it is about being more productive and inclusive in the way our economy runs. We have our 5-point plan on that I no doubt will run throughout this evening. But for Wellington, that will manifest itself in getting our transport systems right, in building more houses, and then recognising who we are as a city that has fantastic people in it, that has some of the most creative people in the world in it, and has universities and institutions like Te Herenga Waka Victoria University that can be the catalyst for high-paying jobs where we transform our economy in the era of climate change. We can do this. Let's keep moving.
Thanks, Grant. Tracy. Nicola. Sorry, I missed someone out.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Like you, I love Wellington and I want to talk about it. Because let's be honest with each other. Even before COVID-19 struck our shores, this city had stopped making progress. We had virtually come to a standstill when it comes to the major projects that we need to prepare for a better future. Let's start with transport. Let's Get Wellington Moving was served up by this government in half-baked form. Major projects like a second terrace tunnel were missing. Other vital projects like a second Mount Vic tunnel were delayed into the never-never. Things have got so bad that this week the consultants were called in to get something happening. Then we look at housing, a challenge that at the last election Mr Robertson said was a crisis. Well, house prices in this city have gone up 30%, rents are up $70 a week, and there are more than 400 more people on the State House waiting list. Meanwhile, the City Council appear overwhelmed. The pipes under our feet are rotting to such an extent that we have had millions of litres of wastewater in our harbour and a described tsunami of faecal matter on our beaches, and yet this government think local government can somehow afford to fund 40% of the state highway projects. At this election, National is presenting a vision for Wellington which at its centrepiece has an integrated transport plan that will support more housing, both greenfields development and densification. If you want progress and action for Wellington, you have to party vote National. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, ko Martin te whānau, ko Mohi te whānau whāngai, ko Ngāti Kahununu te iwi, ko Tracy Takawengoa. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Tracy Martin. I'm a New Zealand First List MP. I'm a member of the current coalition government. And as a member of the current coalition government, I sit in Cabinet, the Appointments and Honours Committee, the Social Wellbeing Cabinet Committee, the Cabinet Priorities Committee, the Cabinet Business Committee, the Government Administration and Expenditure Review Committee, the Cabinet Legislative Committee. I represent on the Tripartite Forum around the future of work. I am a Minister in the COVID-19 Employment, Education and Training Ministers Group, the COVID-19 Border Exemption Ministers Group. I'm Chair of the Better Later Life Ministerial Steering Group, member of the Ministerial Leadership Group on Disability Issues as Associate Minister of Education. I have been involved with the review of vocational education. I'm a member of the joint venture addressing family violence and sexual violence and co-lead on the Child and Youth Wellbeing Strategy with the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern. Why did I tell you all that? I wanted you to make sure that you understood that New Zealand First has been influential in every part of this government. That New Zealand First has not shirked from any of its responsibilities in any of the decisions that this government has had. But there have been times that New Zealand First has had to say no to our coalition partners and to our supply and confidence partners. I haven't had the pleasure of working with Nicola in any sort of governance role, but I have had the pleasure of working with James Shaw and the pleasure of working with the the Honourable Grant Robertson. Bit early. And I have had a great deal of pleasure working with Brooke around the end-of-life choice bill. They are fine people, and I have enjoyed working with them over the last 3 years. We have achieved a lot as a government. But what New Zealand First has brought to these conversations is a balance, is experience and balance. And that's what I'm suggesting, that as we move forward, I believe we've had a good team, but I still believe that you need experience and balance sitting at the table going forward. Kia ora.
Thanks, Tracy. Thank you. Thank you to all our candidates. I think that so ends the polite part of the debate. Right, so let's get on to the next section, which is drilling down into your views on some of the big issues for Wellington. Each candidate was sent the Wellington Chamber's manifesto for election 2020. We will be framing our questions on the 4 key points raised in that report. We've also reached out to attendees for their burning questions, but keep in mind this is a business debate, so we will be keeping the topic focused on business issues and specifically Wellington business issues. Okay, let's get started. The 2020 general election is, we've all said it, haven't we? Arguably the most critical election in a generation. The world has descended into simultaneous health and financial crises, and whilst New Zealand has had early success in containing the virus, we have also experienced a second wave and a second round of restrictions. Front of mind is also the fact that we have no immunity from fiscal contagion. For business, the next 3 years are about recovery, the growth of business confidence, and return to an economy where people freely consume and invest. Last week's GDP figures confirmed that we're now in a recession. Broadly speaking, I'd like to hear from each candidate their view and party's plan for our economic recovery. I think let's just try and limit this a little bit because that's a fairly broad question. Let's start from, should we just start at this end? The other end, we'll start with Tracy this time and work our way to this end.
Of all of that, what will you actually
What is your party's plan for the next year to bring about an economic recovery?
Great, thank you. So from a New Zealand First perspective, we agree that this government was right to lock down the country. At that time, it was the best option to keep us safe in the long term. One of the things we've started to express is our agree to disagree provisions inside the cabinet meeting when it has come to the alert levels for the rest of the country when, say, Auckland was the only place that we knew that we had community transfer. We do believe that we now have in place the systems by which to control community transfer. We now have the COVID app up and running. The latest community transfer outbreak has meant that it has incentivised New Zealanders to download that. We've now got it compulsory that every business has that. So we believe we can now do, if there is another outbreak or community transfer of COVID, that we can contain, we can trace, and we can stamp out. We believe that is the way forward. What we now need to do is work out how to bring others across the border safely. So we've got this part worked out. Now that's the biggest next step for this government is the border.
Brooke, can you talk to that? You talked about looking to Taiwan. How do you deal with the border in that situation?
Yeah, look, a lot of our businesses in New Zealand are really struggling at the moment because of the lockdown and the fact that we do have our borders closed. I think we will need to have them closed for a little bit longer because we don't have that health response that we should have, like Taiwan, where they have rapid testing and tracing. They have better technology. You know, not a single person has been traced by using the COVID app, but what we really, really do need to do is have better temperature checks on people, but we also need to be allowing more people in through the border who aren't coming from risky countries. We need to be looking at what countries are weighted depending on their relevant risk level. So people from Samoa, for instance, who are RSE workers, they should be allowed in to help businesses, and businesses should be allowed to support them coming through the border through private isolation facilities rather than being reliant on the government to do that. I think also when we see things like tertiary institutions crying out for students to be able to come back, and also Auckland schools in particular who have already found facilities where they could isolate people, they should be allowed to bring them back, because if we don't, our economy will suffer. So we have to keep looking at things not as a broad stroke, but what can we do better? Stop asking what we can't do and ask what we can actually do.
Grant, I'm going to ask you about that specifically around some of the skills that people are saying that they're screaming out to have back in the country. How quickly can we see the borders pries open a bit further to bring those skills back, particularly in a high-tech area like Wellington.
Yeah, and we made some announcements yesterday actually around reopening of certain classifications in the visa category. We have had people coming across the border, and we all know about Avatar here in Wellington because it was one of the very early times when people came in, and there was still a little bit of controversy about that at the time. So we are continually extending that. We've also extended visas for people who are already here. So those who are on work visas and working holiday visas have now been rolled over so that people can stay and fill some of those particular gaps. We also have to bear in mind we've got a very large number of New Zealanders who are now unemployed as a result of COVID-19, and we must be working with them, and we've given additional resource to MSD and others to be able to support people to redeploy to those jobs. And obviously we want to be bringing more people in safely. Two announcements on that we've made that I think will make a big difference here in Wellington. One is the extension of the investor attraction program to actually bring people in who also not only have their skills but have the resources that they want to invest. We've given NZTE additional resources to pick up around that area as well, and then expanding out that border capacity so that we can guarantee to business at least 10% of those places initially and then build up from there. So we are progressively doing it, but we're doing it safely because our fundamental duty remains to the health and safety of New Zealanders.
Nicola, do you see that as one of the critical issues for the Wellington economy?
Look, absolutely. When we yo-yo in and out of lockdown, that costs hundreds of jobs. And you ask what's the major issue facing the economy, and it is that job loss that could happen over the next few months and that economists are predicting. So we want to secure the border. We've proposed one border protection agency, and we have said let's look to the future by allowing accommodation providers to be accredited to meet safety standards. Let's introduce pre-departure testing and mandatory testing at day 3 and day 12. Let's manage that border really effectively. But, you know, that won't be enough. To get out of this recession, we need to invest very wisely in intergenerational infrastructure, and we are also proposing a tax relief package because we think that will inject confidence into the economy at a time when it will be critically needed and will help support businesses in our community. So that, combined with actually having a long-term debt reduction plan, is important because fundamentally, if we want businesses to be investing in more assets and more people, we need them to see a confident path out of this crisis and into a more resilient future.
James, can I just ask you about that in terms of the Wellington economy specifically?
Yeah, so rather than focusing on the issues around the border, I think there are two things that I'd like to talk about in terms of directly stimulating the Wellington economy. First of all, I referred to this before, is that in every domain of our built environment, you know, housing, transport, three waters infrastructure, you name it, there is a multi-decade deficit that needs addressing anyway. So given that we need to directly stimulate the economy, let's put those dollars to work on the built environment and doing those things. That will directly support economic activity in the country, and will also add to productivity as the private sector recovers. The second thing actually is an area where Wellington has some specialty, which is in the information technology industry, and that is where we start to increase the value of our export earnings at a time when the restrictions on travel still remain. And of course, it's a weightless export and so on, so it gets over the tyranny of distance. And I think there are three things there that the government can do in the near term to help to stimulate that sector here in Wellington. First of all, we'd like to establish a digital export office at NZ at Trade and Enterprise, because at the moment the sector's disaggregated in terms of how we talk to the rest of the world. Second of all is actually in the domain of procurement. So obviously the government procures billions of dollars of IT services, and often not very well, I have to say, but we have a tendency to purchase offshore, and then to the extent that any of that then gets subcontracted back to New Zealand and to Wellington, it tends to be the lower value portion of the contract rather than the high end. And so I think if we're to rejig our government procurement so that we're trying to ensure that we're supporting local businesses at the high end, where they are developing that skills and capabilities that they can then use to win the contracts from offshore, and you actually reverse that kind of flow of value. And so I think in those two things, directly stimulating through the built environment and supporting our IT sector here in Wellington through things that we can do, then I think that will get us through the next few years. I'm
actually going to drill down a little bit further into the what you were talking about with sort of stimulating the local business. We're seeing the Wellington CBD. It's been emptier. Many office workers are deciding to work from home. We saw one report of a cafe that went from $3,000 a day to selling just one coffee in a whole day. What will you do to reinvigorate the city's CBD? And I'm going to start with you, Nicola.
Well, we do think that is why tax cuts are important, because if average wage earners and all wage earners have a bit more cash in their pocket, they're going to be more confident about spending with our retailers, with our hospitality providers, even with some of our tourism providers.
But I've also back to the CBD,
I've been consistent in saying to Wellingtonians, look, I know that some of you need to work from home to stay safe. Go ahead. But if you can possibly come back to the CBD to work, do so for the good of our city, because actually our community depends on people in our urban cafes and our retailers. And it's not just those on the shop front, it's also every building with office workers in it has people who do the cleaning, has people who service the photocopier, and they won't have jobs if we're all working from home. So yes, keep yourself safe, but think about your community too.
Grant, you have made that sort of appeal yourself, haven't you? But how effective has that actually been?
I think it has, but obviously the move back up alert levels set some of that back. We've got to be frank about that. It's very clear the State Services Commission has said to chief executives that they expect their staff to be working back in their offices in the Wellington CBD under levels 1 and 2. So that is absolutely clear. But there is a longer term trend here, and I think it is important that we don't, try and hide from the fact that one of the things COVID-19 has shown to people that actually they can generate some work-life balance, that they can actually find ways of being as productive as they are when they're in the office. That is a long-term mega trend of the future of work. And so, yes, we want our people back in the CBD right now, but Wellington, and in particular the Wellington City Council, has to be able to think differently about how the city works to attract people in. And an old chestnut of Wellington debates is the pedestrianising, if not of the Golden Mile, then certainly of Lambton Quay. We've got to think innovatively about what will draw people to our CBD at different times. It also includes transport solutions that get them into the city and allow them to be there, and improving our public transport. So yes, I'm all for making sure we have the public service here in Wellington and working in the city, but let's not be naive to the future and actually start planning for it now.
Brooke, do you actually think it's a bad thing, or is it maybe a good thing? Obviously the commerce might be moving out to some of the suburban areas.
Well, to be frank, there's no doubt about the numbers on that. So if you tried to get yourself into a cafe in Jackson Street in Petone during certain levels of the alert levels, you would have known where a lot of people were. I'm saying I still believe we need those people in here now, but this is about a plan for a just transition to the future of work, something I've been working on for many, many years. And one aspect of COVID is that it's exacerbated or brought forward a number of those trends, like working from home. And so therefore, as a city, we've got to be planning for that now and thinking differently around what is in the CBD. We need people in there, 100% agree with that, but there are different ways of attracting them.
I'm going to give Brooke a chance now, but yeah.
Yeah, look, I think a lot of businesses will be moving to a more flexible working environment, but the most important thing that we can do for Wellington businesses and the whole city in general is make sure that we address people's anxiety and concerns that there is COVID in the community. And the best way we can do that is actually by making sure that we have a proper planned health response along what Taiwan has been doing. We need to be getting our border restrictions right so that people can move freely around and they're not feeling anxious and feeling like they need to stay away from the city centres and stay 2 metres a distance apart from people. Because really what we've seen in these rolling lockdowns is people being afraid to go out there, spend their money, but also be in environments with other people. And I think that's detrimental to the economy. But we've seen internationally that countries that haven't had lockdowns and have done better, like Taiwan, have not had that GDP drop in the same rate that we have.
But aren't you talking about an elimination strategy in a way?
No, not necessarily. What I'm talking about here is making sure that people feel confident and comfortable about going back to their lives as they were before, with some restrictions still in place, but also knowing that they have that assurity that people aren't going to get sick, that there isn't going to be COVID popping up and down with lockdowns in the environment that we have.
Tracy, I know you don't want us interrupting and so on, but that's the second time we've had a similar kind of set of comments from Brooke around that. And it's worth pointing out the Oxford University Stringency Index did show that, yes, when New Zealand went into level 4, we had some of the most tight restrictions in the world. When we go into level 1, we actually are the most open and free economy in the world. We've spent a significant amount of time there and at level 2 where we have been able to operate well. And actually, when you look at the rankings and the list of economies and countries who are on there, yep, Taiwan does pretty well. You know who's usually in about second or third? New Zealand.
Tracy, you pointed out yourself.
I have to respond to that. When the Prime Minister stands up at 1 p.m. every day and puts fear into people's hearts that there could be COVID in the community.
Absolute nonsense, Brooke. Absolute nonsense.
Actually affect the economy.
Sorry.
Absolute nonsense.
I just need to pick up on that because the country needs transparency and the truth. And so it is the responsibility of government to make sure that exactly what is going on is placed in front of the people of New Zealand every single day, because only through that information are they able to manage their own lives. But let's get back to the talk about Wellington Central, shall we? I agree with Grant. Life cannot go on as normal, all right? The people need to change. And one of the things that may just change is maybe let's put the housing conversation in with the life in the middle of the CBD conversation. Let's talk about the fact that there are no more office buildings in the side of this city. It's my understanding, as the Minister for Internal Affairs, there's no more office space here. What if we started to use what is an innovative way, and a lot of people found working from home, the isolation and the loneliness of it took away their desire to actually work from home for 5 days a week or 6 days a week.
That and the screaming kids.
Okay.
So what if we were able to free up some of that office space by having flexible workspaces, which we've spoken about probably for 40 years, and turn some of that into apartment dwelling, turn some of that into bringing back real people with real lives that sit inside this sector, inside this city. And the government has funded the arts to make sure that there are still events happening inside the city. My son is out every night of the week inside this city, so I can't say that the CBD is dead around about 11 p.m.
Okay, James, I saw you nodding in agreement, which must be the first time between New Zealand First.
No,
okay, right.
Yeah, that's right. Tracy and I have done lots of good work over the last 3 years. It's just the stuff that we agree on never gets reported on. Only the stuff that we disagree on gets reported on.
Right.
So, look, but the reason I was nodding is because actually a number of businesses have said that and actually government departments have actually said that their productivity has gone up when they have a significant portion of people working from home. And so in saying actually we want everyone to go back to their offices, we're actually arguing for a decrease in productivity, and I'm not sure that that's a great thing. But one way that we can get life into the city is by building more apartments and homes in the city. We desperately need housing, and we know that there are apartment buildings going up at the moment, but we really need to extend that. And one way to do that, just given that we're all projecting our pre-existing prejudices onto these questions, is to build the light rail line from the railway station through to the airport, or certainly up to the hospital in Newtown. Because as you do that, you get a lift in the land value closest to the public transport spine, and that encourages development along that line, because people want to live close to easily accessible, convenient and fast public transport. And so I know you're about to talk about drilling holes in the Mount Vic. I
was going to talk about buses, which are great.
Yeah.
Great in earthquake cities too.
And also don't carry as much people. But so the idea is if you were to do that, then you would actually get a significant amount of more apartments along the city. And there's actually a lot of very poorly utilised space in our city, particularly along Kent and Cambridge Terrace and up Adelaide Road towards Newtown.
Well, that's going to get us on to the next issue, which is quite a critical issue for Wellington, and that is the sense that it's always missing out on the big funding packages. I think if we look at the most recent one out of the $3 billion COVID response recovery fund, $158 million for Wellington, people feel like the city is continually being being passed over. Grant, it's your turn.
I missed my turn.
Oh, did you? Okay, right, yeah.
Well, look, you're absolutely right. And what Grant is going to say is we've put money on the table for Let's Get Wellington Moving. And I'll tell you the problem with that money on the table. The table is so high that local government can't reach it, because the ladder they have to climb to access that cash is they have to provide 40% of every state highway project that this government says they want to do, whether that's sorting out the basin or doing the Mount Vic Tunnel. And I tell you what, if our local government was facing big burdens before COVID-19, our pipes, the central library, the town hall, their burden has increased astronomically since then. So putting forward a package that says to local government, you have to fund 40% of state highway projects is completely unrealistic. That's why National's put forward a fully costed plan that adds an additional $4 billion in central government investment to make sure that we actually can fully fund state highway projects and actually put in bus rapid transit. James and I agree that we need good public transport solutions for this city. I was the first to put my hand up and say there's a bus catastrophe happening. And so I very much believe that we need buses as part of our future. But, you know, having an integrated transport plan isn't just about densification in the central city. It's also about greenfields development. We have the potential for 10,000 more dwellings at a place called Lincolnshire Farm between Petone and Granada. And that's why National actually wants to commit to that new road, because it opens up land for greenfield housing. And that's going to be very important for a city with house prices that have gone up astronomically and where more housing supply is needed.
Grant, why does it always happen that Wellington always seems to be getting the short end of the stick on that?
It doesn't.
Well, I know you're going to say that.
Yeah, but we do have to talk about how we are going to pay for our transport. And we have put over $4 billion on the table for Let's Get Wellington Moving. The problem for Nicola is that her so-called fully costed plan actually includes reprioritising out of the National Land Transport Fund up to, according to National today, $10 billion. So they're actually taking money away from the National Land Transport Fund. So we have put the money on the table. I've been the MP here for a while. I saw what happened under the last government when they actually didn't put resources on the table, or they put such conditions on them that people couldn't even reach them, in that case, around issues around the Basin Reserve. So we have put $4 billion on the table.
Nothing's happened.
I do not think it is at all unreasonable that the Wellington City Council and the Greater Wellington Regional Council should also contribute to that. That's exactly what happens in Auckland, and it's exactly what will happen around the rest of the country. Yes, we need significant investment. If you want to know exactly how much more investment's gone into Wellington in terms of the NLTP, we put $2.4 billion in over this 3-year plan. That's more than the $1.6 billion. It's all over the region, Nicola. It's investing in many, many projects.
What is there to show for it, other than some consultants in a working group? No. Where's the project that's been completed?
No, there is not. The Hutt Road cycling improvements, we've done all of those. We've also had $4.9 million worth of funding gone through the...
You're going to have to do better. Let's get some diggers in the ground. Let's do a tunnel. Let's underground the state highway.
No, let's
put some more buses in. Let's get on with the job and deliver better infrastructure for the city. 9
years, Nicola, you didn't do it. We've actually done the planning and the work now. The business cases arrive on my desk in October.
Not a shovel in the ground.
Right, well, I'll cut in here too then. I think we really do just need to do infrastructure better, and the ACT Party's plan is what would work for Wellington but would also work for all other cities, is that for new builds, when they happen, we would put 50% of the GST from that new build straight to the council so that they can get that money and use it specifically for infrastructure.
Short answer, taken by surprise. Tracy.
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting interaction between Grant and Nicola.
Good interesting or bad interesting, well, Tracy?
It's always interesting when a party that had 9 years to do a whole lot of stuff suddenly discovers that there's all these projects.
It's called fresh energy, Tracy, and it's a great thing. The Parliament needs more of it.
And that's always interesting too. I always find that it's parties that don't have policy that stacks up that like to interrupt and argue with others at
Okay, let's do a quick fire. And I think this time I'm starting from Grant in the middle. If you could sign off on one shovel-ready project right now in Wellington City, what would it be?
What it would be is the redevelopment of the Wellington City mission.
Okay. Brooke.
Well, this is a trick question because I don't agree with any of the shovel-ready projects.
You can make up your own. Yeah.
I think we should be cutting taxes and getting that money back into the economy that way, rather than through the government deciding what it would like to support, like James Shaw's Green School. Sorry, James.
Tracy.
Well, one, she's not sorry, let's get real. From a New Zealand First perspective, I'd actually like to have a look at the $25 million government investment that could go into the current convention centre.
Okay, right. Even in the days of COVID. Even in the age of COVID?
Well, because we're going to come out the other side of COVID. We're doing quite a lot of things to prepare for COVID, for the end of COVID, sorry. The world will come back and we will have people come across the border. We need to be ready for when that happens, and now's the moment. If we're going to borrow money to do stuff, let's do stuff that future-proofs us.
James.
I was actually going to say the Wellington City mission as well, but I'm going to punt for light rail from the railway station through to the airport.
Okay.
I think it's pretty well established that I would like to double the Mount Vic Tunnel. It's a relic from 1931. It's no good for pedestrians, cyclists or car users, and we should get on with future-proofing it.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're going to now move on to our next topic, which is preparing for growth. Wellington City is expecting to grow by almost 80,000 by 2043, but the city has also several major problems that is holding it back, and we've heard a lot about those tonight. The first issue is water. Wellington's water network is simply not up to scratch and desperately needs investment. How will you work with local councils in Wellington Water to ensure the pipes are fit for purpose? And I think we're starting with Brooke now.
Well, I alluded to it earlier, which is that we just don't have the money that we need for council to do good infrastructure. And it's really quite a shame that I think it was, 20% of water is being leaked from our pipelines at the moment. We're wasting water because we need to upgrade our infrastructure. And the council needs to get money from new builds because those two things go hand in hand. We need more homes for where people can live, but we also need infrastructure, because what sort of council is going to sign off on building new roads and putting in new pipelines for new homes if it's not actually getting money for that? So we want to incentivise people to build new homes in Wellington, but we also want 50% of the GST from those new builds to go to the council to pay for the infrastructure and to upgrade it, because we do need to upgrade our water supply.
Okay, I'm going to ask people to be a little bit quicker because we've got so much to cover and we're running out of time. Tracy.
So, Nanaia Mahuta, so I'm the Minister for Internal Affairs, and the Minister for Local Government sits inside of Internal Affairs. So Nanaia Mahuta has been working on the Three Waters infrastructure issue on behalf of the coalition government for some time, for the 3-year period. All 67 councils signed up to phase 1 by the 31st of August. They have till the 30th of September to put their other documents on the table. The government has put something, I'm not sure.
750 million.
Thank you very much, Grant. Into this
all over the
pot.
numbers.
But he is all over the numbers. But the reality is we're very aware that the council's infrastructure, particularly water infrastructure, stormwater, etc., across the country is in dire straits. Government's going to step in with local government to make sure that we fix what is underneath the ground.
James.
Yeah, I think we're in a, this is one of those areas where debt financing the infrastructure makes perfect sense given the time, the particular peculiar circumstances that we're in at the moment. I would like to say that actually councils have had an opportunity because, of course, the depreciation has come through for all of those assets, but rather than being spent on maintaining and replacing those assets, they've been using it for other things. And so that suggests that we need to do quite a lot of work on the system of how we kind of govern and manage those assets as well. And Nanaia has been leading on that, and I think actually has done a superb job in getting us to the start line there.
Okay, Nicola.
It is a major issue for Wellington, and I concur with James that I think part of the problem has been that While we can cut ribbons for things that are above ground, the below ground assets aren't quite as sexy. But, we have a situation in Wellington where our local waterways are so polluted that there are actually health warning signs up at the stream. So we have to resolve it. And I've said the first step is actually doing a proper audit of how degraded those assets are. And I think local government should front up and say, here's where we think the problem is, the extent of it, and how much it's going to fix it. And then that then leads to the conversation about how it's financed. We've proposed measures such as a infrastructure bank. But I do want to come back to that point I made earlier. We are going to have to make massive investments in our water infrastructure in this city. Is it really realistic to also say to local government, hey, pay for 40% of the Basin Reserve, pay for 40% of the Mount Vic Tunnel? I think if we say that, it's a recipe for more congestion and more sclerosis.
Grant.
Yeah, on the water front, I mean, we have put that money on the table, and the three parties of government were all part of deciding on that. Phase 1 is 750 million, so that gives you an indication of the scale of what we have to do here. It is a carrot and stick approach, and I want to be really clear about that. The funding is there, but it goes with a commitment from those local government agencies to work together across a region, but also to make sure they do the very thing that James said, that there is a responsible forward budget plan for how the ongoing maintenance works. It's a very detailed and comprehensive plan, and there's actual money on the table right now. It also has the advantage of being job generating as well in the near future. So I think it's something that all three parties of the government can be very proud of. We addressed a very long-standing issue.
Okay, this is going to be very quick. Yes or no, water metering? James.
The Greens' favourite issue.
It's complicated.
Okay, right. Nicola.
No, audit first.
No.
Yes. No. Okay, thank you very much. The next one is transport infrastructure. We've talked about the Let's Get Wellington Moving package. Is there any way to get that moving forward? I think we've probably traversed that one more than enough, actually. We'll move on. Let's go on to housing. We've touched on that, but I do want to ask you a quick question. What was the average asking price for residential property in the Wellington region in August?
$740,000 was the median.
700, and yeah, it's about. The average wouldn't be quite that, but 740.
Yeah, that's close enough.
Much more than I gave up on a long time ago.
Yeah. You're the only one who doesn't have a house amongst this group, I gather. Yeah. Tracy, I guess you're going to... No, yeah. I think the numbers we've got are around 760 to 890, somewhere in that group.
The important point there is it's gone up 30% in 3 years.
Yeah. As we discussed before, there are more people looking to live in the city. Add to that the significant number of people who cannot buy a house or apartment in Wellington, are pushed to live in suburbs. What are you going to do to encourage new builds in the region, and particularly the middle of the city? And I know you talked about further out, Nicola. Tracy, I think we start with you now.
Sure. So you could break this into a couple of sections, actually. I was at the Women's Homeless House yesterday. So that is something that is owned by Kāinga Ora, that is a peppercorn rental. So there is a pathway there for the government agency to own more houses and actually set up housing opportunities or living opportunities for some of our citizens. I was up in Auckland looking at Hamaru, which is a partnership between Auckland Council and Selwyn Village, which had 40 apartments, 4 levels, and it was specifically for seniors housing. And New Zealand First had actually, with the changes that we had around overseas investment, we fought to keep some opportunities for external investors to come, particularly for apartment buildings.
Okay. James.
Yeah, actually, the Green Party is taking housing as one of our top 6 priorities into this election campaign, and it is one of those things where you kind of need to do quite a lot of everything, right? So there's no one lever that's going to solve the whole problem. But massively increasing the state housing program would help to take some of the steam out of the market. Working with community housing providers to scale them up so that they can then essentially supplement what it is that the the state does. But also, we are, of course, going to be replacing the Resource Management Act with a Built and Natural Environments Act and the Strategic Planning Act and a Climate Change Adaptation Act. And so in that mix, I think that we should see some sort of getting rid of some of that kind of sclerosis that's kind of stuck in that prevents houses from getting built as fast as we want. But like I said before, one of the best things that we can do to encourage inner city housing is to actually get that transport spine functioning, and that will drive up land values, which will encourage developers to get in and convert what are currently things like car yards into apartment buildings.
Do we need to drive up land values anymore in Wellington? I guess that's the issue. Nicola?
Well, I think one thing we can all agree on is that the answer is not Kiwi Build. Actually, the problems are more fundamental than that. And if we're going to encourage more housing supply, we simply have to make it easier for a developer who buys either a piece of land or a building to provide more dwellings on that site. That's why we're campaigning on complete repeal of the Resource Management Act and replacing that with one Urban Planning Act and one Environmental Standards bottom line. But when we're thinking about inner city housing, we do need to also consider the region as a whole, because housing does have a regional dynamic. When you build more houses on greenfield sites throughout the region, it does ease pressure in the inner city too. So I'm a big advocate of both. We need to go up and out.
Okay, Grant.
Yeah, the problem with the obsession in New Zealand with going out is that it's led to very unsustainable urban development right around the country. And so we do need to be talking about what happens in the city as our priority. And I agree with everything that James said about the building blocks of that. What we've done in this government is actually get a national policy statement on urban development out so that we can now work with our councils around how we do build that. We are actually seeing some really good office conversions. Ian Castle's work on Education House and the building across the road, LT McGuinness's new building that they're building as well in Victoria Street. So we're starting to see it, and we can continue to support and encourage that through a range of programs. Kiwi Build will be one of them. There actually are Kiwi Build apartments being built in Wellington, but there'll also be further developments through progressive home ownership and also with the community housing providers.
Very quickly.
There is just way too much bureaucracy when it comes to trying to build a home. There are building companies that go bust with how long it takes to get through council. And so what we would say is that we would scrap the RMA, put in place a new Urban Development Act, but we would also say that we would take a lot of that bureaucracy outside of council and put in place compulsory private building insurance. So a company would need to get their own insurance done, but that would allow them to not have those hold-ups when it goes through council, but allows them also to use building construction materials that they use in earthquake-prone cities in Japan as well, that take forever to get sign-off in New Zealand.
Okay, and that's one area I do want to go on to next, and that is around earthquakes and insurance. We know that this has been a big issue for Wellington. Insurance companies are leaving the capital high and dry. Premiums have quadrupled for many businesses and property owners. There has been an insurance task force set up, but it's lacked progress. Will you move to set up a government-based insurance provider for commercial and residential buildings? Can I start with, where are we at? I think it must be Nicola's turn.
No, that's not on the agenda, but I do want to acknowledge the significant challenge Wellingtonians have had with insurance premiums going up. And I've said previously that we need to both look at the Unit Titles Act to make sure that works better for those in apartment dwellings, but we also do need to review some of the requirements around seismic strengthening, because what we're seeing is people spending hundreds of thousands of dollars strengthening their building and then being told that their insurance premiums is going to skyrocket regardless. I do also think that there's a case for looking at how well that market's operating, because I have been very struck by the stories of insurance premiums going up and up and up, and that just doesn't seem right to me.
Right, that's a big issue, isn't it?
It is. Actually, this is something on which certainly James and Nicola and myself have actually got a very similar view, to the extent that the chair of the Insurance Council wrote to tell us off after we all talked about this at a previous meeting. So I will reiterate what I said at that meeting, which is that there are major issues in this sector. Firstly, there's the transparency around pricing. So the insurance industry is claiming that they've moved to full risk risk-based pricing. They haven't. They've moved to a version of risk-based pricing, and they need to be more transparent about how they work that out. They're currently doing it, in my opinion, by postcode. Then if they have that much information, they could do it by building, and then it really would be full risk-based pricing. Nicola's right. Both governments have changed over the years, the Building Code and the Building Act, and people have spent a lot of money strengthening their buildings only to discover it has no impact whatsoever on their insurance premiums. We were and we are in the middle of a work program on that. It got a bit derailed by COVID. It includes what more EQC could do, some regulation within the industry and more transparency.
So you do see a role for EQC, Brooke, is that where we're at?
Yeah. I mean, certainly this is not an area that we have defined policy on. I'd like to see that private building insurance for new builds, but certainly when we already have buildings that are affected by earthquakes now, I think the government could have a larger role to play there.
So one of the first things I did as the Minister of Internal Affairs was actually pause the piece of legislation that would put up the fire and emergency levy on our businesses that had been introduced by the previous national government because it would have crippled some of our businesses and put them out of business. So we're doing a review around that to try and actually come to a fairer system. So we're trying not to add to what the insurance companies are already adding to. But New Zealand First actually campaigned on a state insurer in 2017. We see them as being required in the market in the same way that Kiwibank came into the market. Not to take over the market, but to actually be a player to move the market and keep the market more honest.
Okay.
I think the issue about having a state-run insurance company is it still needs reinsurance, and that really is one of the big things that's been driving the changes ultimately at the consumer end in New Zealand since Christchurch. And I completely agree with what Grant had to say. I'm a big fan of risk-based pricing. You would think that would make sense, and if you can get your building up to a certain scratch which lowers the risk, you would think that your premiums would go down, but they're not. And so I would say that actually we actually need to say that it isn't risk-based enough, and to keep pushing that. The one thing that I'm slightly nervous about is that I just say this with my climate change minister hat on, there is also a whole insurance conversation going on around other risks that we are becoming more and more exposed to over time, to do with natural hazards, sea level rise, flood risk, and so on. I think we just need to put a bit of a firewall between that part of the conversation and the one around earthquakes, because the risks, they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. And so, we need to work with the industry on both sides of that equation.
We are running out of time, so I'm just going to finish up with something that is a fairly specific Wellington issue, and is how will you ensure that Wellington is as ready as it can be for a big earthquake? And do you think we are? I think Nicola. Yeah.
Well, this is why it's so important that we start paying down the debt eventually that we do have to incur to recover our economy. But what National set out is a plan that gets us back into surplus by 2028 and has debt down. Labor have not set out that plan. In the pre-fu, they forecast a decade of deficits into the future and no plan to get that debt down in a sustainable way. We have said that is a priority because you're right. There will be future shocks to our economy. It may be that that's a major earthquake in Wellington, and we need Wellington to be ready if that happens.
Grant, is Wellington ready when you look at the transport links and the resilience of the buildings?
Look, Wellington still has work to do, but it's improved significantly over recent times, and it's actually what we've just been talking about is the issue around the work that people have done to reinforce buildings and strengthen buildings that hasn't been recognised on the insurance side. But we have to continue to work on that and to support building owners and homeowners through that process as well. So there is more to do there, but we've made significant progress. Just to pick up on Nicola's point, the really important thing here is to actually have a balanced plan that allows us not only to manage our debt but also invest in our public services, and even more critically than that, a plan that actually adds up.
Yeah, well, I thought I'd just leave that hanging for a minute. I agree with Grant. There has been a lot of work done, but the city needs to be even more resilient. So some of that is about, and it's inside the documents that were sent, it says about another water line, it is about another power transition line, and it is around some alternatives to, if a couple of at least one of the state highways was closed, is there other ways that we can get through and round? But it is a work in progress, and now is the time to do it. If we're going to borrow, now is the time to do it, because it runs into employment, it future-proofs what is the economy for the future, and that's what you would want to use debt for.
Okay, thanks. Brooke.
Look, it's really important that we do not have as much debt as the Labour Party wants to borrow. So the ACT Party has found that we could borrow $76 billion less and still have a good growing economy and a strong economy to go forward. I'm glad that the National Party have come to the party on debt, because it wasn't sure where they were going there for a second. But it's very important that we pay down our debt and we get back to a surplus sooner than the National Party and the Labour Party both predict.
Okay, now I think we do have everyone's had their journey. Oh, James, sorry.
Look, when it comes to preparedness for earthquakes, there is an area that I would have liked to have seen more progress on, because it was something that all three parties that are in the government actually campaigned on, which is around our coastal shipping network. And I do think that one of the key resilience issues for Wellington, given the, the kind of concern about those transport links, will be to make sure that our port is set up for that, and that actually that we've got the ships and facilities available around the country to be able to bring those supplies in. The other thing that would really help with resilience to earthquake insurance, to earthquake resilience, is things like making sure that our homes are insulated, that they've got solar panels on the roof and batteries in the batteries to get back up, that we've got, rainwater capture and so on, so that, if you do see that kind of disruption, whilst certainly, not every house is going to, be able to retain that actually you've got a sort of a distributed resilience across the whole city, rather than having kind of big hub and spoke infrastructure that gets busted during a significant event like that.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think we do actually have a little bit of time for questions from the audience. I think someone's got a hand mic, which they'll... I gather the audio here is sufficient to hear. Thanks, Tracy. Thank you so much. If everyone could say... Now, do we have any questions? Gentleman right up the back there. Yeah.
Hey guys, I've got one question for you. What are you going to do about homelessness in the central city? It's got worse in the last couple of years, and I'm sick of seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, one of the things that was really interesting out of COVID-19 was during Alert Level 4, we worked with the Downtown Community Ministry and the Wellington City Mission, and we actually, for a period of time, eradicated rough sleeping. We did that as a result of actually having a proper partnership with proper resources. We've poured significant amount of money in there. Unfortunately, as you would inevitably expect, there's been a little bit of slip back, but the way to do it is to make sure that we build more transitional housing, more public housing, which we're doing with 8,000 places coming on board, and also making sure that we actually support those social services agencies to be able to do this. So what we did was actually put a lot of those people into motels. That is not a sustainable long-term plan. That's why we need other forms of both then transitional and then permanent housing. That's what we'll be building. So I reckon we've made a really good start on it. Those social service agencies in Wellington do a great job, and we've just got to keep resourcing them and public housing.
Nicola.
Well, I want to acknowledge DCM and the Wellington City Mission and the Home of Compassion, who do incredible work for our needy in Wellington. We are well served by them. National supports a housing first approach, which is to say that those who are homeless often have additional needs as well, whether that be mental health challenges, whether that be that they are victims of domestic violence, whether they've suffered with addiction. And so a housing first approach says, let's take people who are homeless, provide them housing first, and then wrap support services around them to get to the underlying issues that are causing them to be unable to sustain a tenancy. So we believe strongly in that. We think it's a good social investment, and that's part of our housing policy.
Okay, James. I mean, is it that simple? There are social services wrapped around.
Well, no, obviously it isn't that simple, but it is also the government's strategy. It's actually what we're doing, so it's good to have support from the opposition on that.
We started it.
Very good. Keep it up. So, I mean, this is really what the Green Party's Homes for All plan speaks to. Given the scale of the investment that we're putting into the economy, housing can be at the top of the priority list for that. We know that the sector could probably get up to about 5,000 homes per year. So we've said that we want to be building up to 5,000 homes a year for public housing, and also invest significantly in the community housing sector as well, to ensure that we start to get some of those kind of large-scale providers like you see in the UK and other countries around the world.
Brooke, just quickly.
Yeah, I think there are two parts to your question, and the first is housing, and that we would reform the RMA and make sure that there are more affordable homes in New Zealand. But secondly, it really does speak to mental health and addiction problems in our country, because that is a huge root of why people end up on the street. And the ACT Party has a plan to reform and transform the entire mental health system, and we would put all of that money that is currently being spread through multiple agencies in one centralised mental health and addiction New Zealand entity, so that people do have ongoing care and they can get the care when they are at their most vulnerable. And I think something that really does need to change is, in particular in our addiction space, when someone goes and gets rehabilitation and they end up being rehabilitated, there is no ongoing care. And so we do need to make sure that people aren't relapsing because the care ends, and that they do have an individualised and tailored response.
Does that answer the question? Yes, we've got a woman there.
What's the number one thing that you're going to do to help small business in Wellington?
Yeah, do you want to start? James.
Well, look, like I was talking about before, there are two ways I think that we can directly stimulate the economy in Wellington. One is to ensure that we are actually injecting that stimulus spend into our built environment. That does flow through because those builders and construction companies actually spend that money in the economy. Second of all, like I said, I think that we can really supercharge our ICT sector here as well, if we're really focused about it. But third, it's about ensuring that people who have the support that they need, that they get the support that they need when they need it. And we know that the level of that the one thing that you can do that does the most in terms of getting money into the local economy is actually to ensure that people who are at the kind of bottom end of income earners are actually being paid properly, or if they're out of work, to make sure that they've got a level of income support. 100% of that money flows through into local businesses.
Brooke.
So we do need to back our businesses, and the ACT Party says that we would decrease GST from 15% to 10% for a year. We would also lower income tax rates, but we would also put in place a moratorium on minimum wage for 3 years, because in a recession, the worst thing we can do is have businesses who are unsure whether they should or should not be taking on a new employee, especially when we've got people switching out of careers into new ones where they can find employment.
Brand.
Actually, I think the worst thing you could probably do in a recession is impoverish people who are already on low income.
I'm sorry, Grant, but we're just putting it back to the exact same rate that you had before the lockdown.
Well, no.
Were you impoverishing people, Grant?
No, what we're actually... No, you talked about what you want to do to ban them, 3 years ban on increasing the minimum wage. To answer your question...
So why was it okay just before the lockdown?
It wasn't. We've been increasing the minimum wage and you've been criticising us for years. To answer your question specifically, you want one specific thing in our policy? We're going to get rid of scrap merchant fees. Or regulate them, anyway. So, yeah, that's great. It's been a long day, folks. Regulate the merchant fees. I'd like to scrap them too, but I don't think the banks will agree.
Nicola.
Stop piling on costs and reduce the tax that the people who you need spending in your business are paying.
Everybody's talking about eye-watering levels of debt. As a small business owner, I try to balance my books. It's easy to say, yes, we'll get us back into surplus. No one's talked about immigration and growing the tax base. What is your plan to actually help grow the tax base so we can increase the number of people who are paying tax? And what is your policy on bringing more people into Wellington and into New Zealand?
May I? So right now, look, I mean, can I just say something about the border? So a lot of the issues around capacity at the border isn't to do with physical buildings. It's actually to do with our human capability. So currently, not a lot of people know this, but currently we have a third of our armed forces deployed at the border, right? We have police at the border. We have, health professionals at the border and so on. And so every new facility that we open up for quarantine means that you've got to put all of those people in place at the border to ensure that it's locked tight, right? So actually, there are kind of probably physical facilities where we could put people, but you've got to put all of those other things around it. So it is going to be very tight. We've got tens of thousands of New Zealanders who are returning home at the moment, and that will obviously abate, and as it does, we'll obviously be able to start to increase spaces for people coming in for work. But that doesn't answer your question. At the moment, what I'm just saying is I guess we need to just temper our expectations about our ability to suddenly turn on the tap to foreign workers coming into New Zealand to fill skills gaps, for the next kind of 12 to 24 months or however long it's going to take for us to do that. We just need to be kind of mindful of that. We just need to, a real conversation about that. But if you want to talk about broadening the tax base, do I have a solution for you? Because at the moment, he was talking about expanding the tax base. At the moment, you are seeing, we had a record close on the NZX last week. House prices in this country are 15% up on average over the same time last year, and you're seeing asset prices inflate as that stimulus money flows through wage earners in the form of the wage subsidy and small business support and so on and so forth into asset owners. And yet, we don't tax asset owners at nearly the same rate that we do wage earners. And yet, it is the wage earners who are going to be paying back the debt through their earnings, a tax on earnings, and not on assets. But you're seeing massive inflation on asset prices there.
That sounds like a whole debate of its own.
It is, yeah. and it should be, because if we're going to be able to pay back this debt, we should be. Hang on, I need to finish this. Sorry, because that was the question. If we're going to be able to get ourselves through this, then we should be asking the people who are doing well as a result of the stimulus to chip in to help to pay for it.
Assets.
So Jeremy, to answer your question, immigration as we go forward over the next few years in New Zealand will continue to be a part of our economy. It'll continue to be how we make sure we have fill the skill gaps and we have the people that we need here. We will, as James said, have to progressively grow that as we safely open up the borders. But I too want to take on the question that that's the way, or the best way, that we increase our tax base. That's actually been part of our problem in New Zealand for a long time, that we've relied too much on immigration for that. It's why we've got to heavily invest in the things that are going to lift wages here, which is about productivity. So it's about investing in skills, investing in research and development, improving our infrastructure, adding value in all of the areas that we do well in. So we do agri-tech, we do IT, like James has said. That's actually the most sustainable way to grow our tax base. Immigration will be part of it, but we can't rely on it.
Okay, Nicola.
Jeremy, you won't be surprised to hear that we don't think that the way to grow the economy is to slap on a wealth tax or a capital gains tax during a time of recession. We do think that a smart border that allows for people to come in when it is safe to do so is a good idea, and we have set out plans to achieve that. But fundamentally, if you want to increase the tax base, we're going to need more people in jobs, because actually every person who isn't in a job we have an obligation to be supporting in some way, and they're not paying tax. So our job creation plans are partly about investing in quality infrastructure. They're partly about stimulating the economy by supporting businesses and having in lower taxes. But we've also put forward the Job Start scheme, so $10,000 for every job that a business creates. So job creation is the key to growing the revenue base.
Okay, and Brooke, it looks like you get the last word.
I think we have a real hope and opportunity with what we have in the world, with people wanting to come home back to New Zealand, people who have left to go to really high-paying jobs overseas in areas that we don't actually have in New Zealand, like in the tech sector and in science research. And I think one of the best things that we could do is allow our regulatory regime to actually have those businesses start up here in New Zealand and employ more people who want to come and live here and bring their families with them. And I think one really, really opportune industry is in genetic research and science. And I'd like to see people who want to create new sustainable research, particularly around agriculture, who have to go to America for their science, be able to do that in New Zealand, because I think that is something that could really grow and stimulate our economy.
Okay, I'm conscious that we've come to the end of the time we've allocated. Thank you to our candidates for such a robust and polite debate, actually. As we offer to all our guest speakers, we have a bottle of Pinot Noir from our members, Atarangi, for each candidate, and John is handing those out now.